Now this lens here has a really great depth of In this video today, we're going to talk about my Nikon lens collection and how I used each tool as a way to complete my creative work. My name is Ethan. I run a production company called Golden Toucan, and these are my Nikon lenses. So I have them laid out here from most telephoto to the widest, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I got each lens and how they work together as a team to complete my creative work. So the first lens is actually the first lens that I bought after I got my kit lens, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is the AFS Nikkor 20mm 1.8. This is a great lens for astrophotography. It's an F-mount lens. I've just got the FTZ adapter here on it all the time because I don't own any F-mount cameras. This is a great lens. It's a pretty great focal length for video, but the interesting thing about this lens is that I actually got it for vlogging. I was doing a little side project vlogging on Facebook every once in a while with my wife, and so I wanted to have a lightweight lens that was wide and had good autofocus. Now, unfortunately, that autofocus is what makes this lens actually a terrible vlogging lens. It has a very loud motor, and when it autofocuses, you can hear it. So it's actually not a great lens for video with autofocus unless you're pretty far away. However, I did actually use it a ton when I only had a 35mm lens for my FX6 camera, and I used just a dummy adapter and used it as a manual lens. The other neat thing about this lens, it has some interesting character to it that the rest of my S lenses don't really have. They're all pretty much just really sharp and just kind of get the job done straightforwardly. So this lens has a little bit of art to it, and that's why I really like it and keep it around. The next lens in my collection is the 14-30 f4. So I kind of got this lens because of the shortcomings of the 21.8. This lens has a great focal range. I think 14 is a super useful focal length, and I really love the 24mm focal length. It's one of my favorites, and so the fact that this can go from 24 to 30, that's a really helpful range where I use this lens in a lot. I love this lens because it folds down nice and compact, and it is a super wide lens, but you can still put filters on it. That is one thing I also like about the 21.8. It fits 77mm filters. This one does 82mm, but it's still a great thing to be able to put your NDs on here or your polarizers. I really like the fact that this lens is so small, because for the most part, I kind of just don't worry about how big my lenses are, as you can see by this honker here. This one's really nice to just have in my bag, get those super wide shots that you don't need a whole ton of, and then get the rest of your work done with some slightly tighter lenses in that kind of 24 to 70 range. So I really like having this lens around, but it's not what I use all the time. But if I do need to vlog or do something that's a little bit more unique with the wide focal range, this is definitely the lens that I choose. One of the reasons I picked up this lens is because the Z6 has the ability to record 4K 60 with a 1.5 times crop. So with a 1.5 times crop, this 14mm f4 lens turns into a lens, and so I find that more useful than what a 24 would turn into on that crop. This lens is not one that I use a whole lot, but it's definitely good for vlogging. Pretty good piece of kit, and I really appreciate that Nikon makes good f4 lenses that are cheaper and can help you fill out your kit quicker. The Nikon 24-70 f4. This is somewhat of a legendary lens, if I'm being honest. I hear a lot about this lens. People online really like it, and I think it's just because it has no business being this good as a kit lens. It really keeps up in any professional's workflow, I think. I don't think there's any reason that you'd be using this lens and needing to upgrade it unless you needed more aperture flexibility. F4 is a great range that you can do a lot with, especially with these Nikon cameras with great ISO abilities. It's not one I use a whole lot, but if I'm going to be taking family pictures or hiking, I really like that this lens is a little bit lighter and it just really gets the job done, and I don't feel like I'm skimping when I use this lens, other than that ability to get kind of good bokeh and depth of field. I really like the build quality of this f4 lens. I really like the focal range. 24-70 is probably my favorite as a video maker, and you want a lighter gimbal payload or you're hiking, that's when I would use this lens. I don't use it much for events. It's great for multicams because it looks so close to the other Nikon lenses and you may be shooting a multicam interview, I would use this lens right at f4 and use my other lenses at f4, and they would all look very similar. And that's why I really appreciate have this lens around, because that normal focal range I can now duplicate with multiple focal lengths. I definitely don't have any problems keeping this lens around. I think it's great, and I use it every once in a while to be kind of clutch. Now we have another unique lens from my collection. This is the Nikon AF Nikkor 50mm 1.4. So super shallow depth of field on this lens. It is manual focus and it does have an aperture ring, but the Nikon cameras demand that you just lock it at 16 and modify that digitally. I've once again got the FTZ adapter on the bottom here because I don't have an F-mount camera body. So this lens is absolutely tiny. You can see without the FTZ adapter, it's just that little puck there. It's about the same size as the FTZ, a little bit bigger. But this is a super cool and unique lens. I really like having it around. It doesn't have that sharp look that the rest of the S lenses have, so it really appeals to video creators in that way. Obviously, it's super hard and weird to work with. We've got the fact that this, when you focus, the barrel will kind of go in and out. It has pretty terrible focus breathing, but the look of it at 1.4 is just truly unique. Obviously 1.4 can have some great utility. I used this lens to take some photos at a zoo one time, and it was really cool to get those strange looking photos because it is kind of just distorted and different and not perfect and sharp like a lot of my other lenses. I really have fun working with this. It works great on the FX6 as a manual focus lens, got a really nice unique look, and I just really like how cheap it was for how cool it is. Now this lens is not my only 50mm. 50mm is a focal length that I really appreciate because it's similar to the human eye view, but the 51.8 S lens is actually what you're watching on this camera here. So that lens is a lens I got for travel specifically, and it has kind of an interesting utility as a travel lens because it is a prime, but I kind of just like limiting myself when I'm out traveling. But yeah, I think that lens has a great value. It's fairly cheap, it's less than $1,000, and I think the 1.8 is really nice if you've got a bunch of zooms. To have a couple of primes that you sprinkle in there that you use is really awesome. The 51.8 I use as a multicam lens. I use it for kind of stylistic photos and video clips, and I sometimes kind of utilize that 1.8 aspect of it as opposed to my 24-70 or other lenses. So it's a great lens. I really love that it's small and compact, but it's also really great image quality and is great for traveling. I wish the filter head was a little bigger, but I just always keep my adapter on it and it works great there. Something you'll notice about my lenses is a lot of them have lens gears on them, but for the most part, they're just on the zoom portion of the lens. And that's because unfortunately Nikon has decided that despite the fact that the focus ring is controlled completely digitally, they would rather just have some weird digital system as opposed to letting us customize the focus ring to behave in a linear fashion, so that having a focus gear on your focus ring is actually useful. So for most of these lenses, the focusing doesn't actually work with a follow focus system. Interestingly, on the Z9, you can use and program your focus ring to have different responses, and you can have a linear response so that you can do manual focusing, but that is not an option on the other camera bodies or on most lenses. So hopefully that's something that they can add. I know there's some Tamron lenses that have some really great ability to change your focus response, and so I would really appreciate having that ability on my cameras. I would set them all to be a linear focus with a nice generous throw so that I can use a follow focus. Okay, we've made our way to the main event, the 24-70 2.8. When I first got my Z6, this is the lens that I got with it because I said I want the lens that can do it all. This lens takes the best videos, the best photos. It has very little focus breathing. I have done so much professional work with this lens and I love it, love it, love it. It is so well built. Of course, all of these lenses I trust in a little bit of a downpour, except for this one. This lens is durable. It's got all of the rings, control rings that I could ever want. Once again, yeah, I wish the focus ring could be changed to be linear, but at least you do have the aperture ring. I love the lens function button. It's always right there when I need it. And the OLED display, you know what? It seems kind of silly, but when I spend this much money on a lens, I like that it has an OLED display that can do kind of goofy things. I appreciate that. This lens I love to death. I use it all the time. It lives on my Z6 II pretty much for most things other than 4K 60 when I have that crop going on. This is the lens that I want to use first, and everything else is built around that. This is the reason why I make this video, but also if I had to give all of the lenses away and just keep one, this would absolutely be the one I'd keep. I use this lens a lot for events. If I'm doing any kind of coverage where I don't have control of anything, just kind of milling around with the camera, this lens is so crucial for that because you can get those nice wide shots of the environment, and then you can also punch in on details and kind of blur out the background at that 72.8 focal length. I use this lens wide open a lot. I'm not aware of any glaring issues with this lens at any focal length. I really appreciate Nikon putting the extra work into this lens to make it so good. I think it is one of the better 24 to 72.8s that are available. You've probably all been wondering what is going on with this thing. This is my 70-200 in kind of my custom cage. So I don't really use this lens very often unless it's on a tripod or I'm trying to go handheld. And so if I'm trying to go handheld with this lens, I find it really annoying because I'm scared about breaking my Z mount. So I like to keep the weight off the camera body, and I like to have abilities to maneuver this without having the camera attached. So here lies what I've created here, this monstrosity. This is the Nikon Z 70-200 2.8 VR with a little bit of a small rig base plate here with some like 12-inch rods maybe, and then I have a couple accessories attached pretty much all the time. So first of all is this little contraption here. This actually gives me the ability to put a top handle or a monitor on this lens when I'm using it. And I really like having the top handle because once again, I would rather maneuver this with the solid base here connected to the bottom rather than picking it up and moving everything with the lens here. I just want to take good care of it. This is an expensive lens, and it's just, I want to be careful with it. So I have this NATO rail up here up top, so I can either use a nice little tiny handle like this one, or I can slap the Ninja V up here, which I use very frequently to get that 10-bit video. So this system just allows me to put that weight of the Ninja V with a battery or the top handle onto these rails down here instead of having that pushing on the camera body, which is pushing up against the mount or anything like that. I have a lens support here. This is just kind of to balance it out and make sure I have 2 points of contact within the cage system. I've got a nice little rosette here. There's usually a side handle that I mount right here, and I use that so that I have kind of 2 ways to hold the camera. I hold the camera with my right hand and rosette here, but I can also pop that right off. It's the beauty of rosettes. And then I pretty much always have this follow focus on here. And once again, it's not on the focus ring, it's actually on the zoom ring, so I can have a nice gentle focus. This is height adjustable up and down in case the camera I'm using has a battery grip on it or not. And then also I can mount one of my battery solutions on the bottom here. So I can put an NPF battery plate or clip in a USB battery pack or a V-mount battery as well on the bottom of these rails. And once again, the weight is on the rig and not on the lens itself. One other thing, I also use the Kessler quick release lens foot for the 70-200. One of the reasons I do that is because I like that it has the Arca Swiss built in. It's just kind of a beefier foot, and I like how it holds and fits in a tripod, and everything about it is just better than the one that comes from Nikon. But I also like the ability to swap out the 2 feet and just kind of leave the cage behind. So you can see I removed it here, and that all sits ready to go for the next time I need to use it. Anyway, let's talk more about the 70-200 itself. So when I got this lens, the weight for it was really terrible. I ordered it pretty early on when it came out, and we were kind of getting into the COVID throes, and so it had a lot of delays, so that was a big bummer. And I remember when I finally got it and I realized just how nice a quality it was, how great it looked at every focal length, how great it looked at 2.8 throughout every focal length. I just knew this was a really special piece of technology, and I watched a lot of videos talking about it and just giving it a lot of praise, and so I just really was aware of how great this lens was. I know as soon as I put it into my multicam workflow, the way it was just able to punch in on someone's head and shoulders and get that nice bokeh and get the great color rendition and get the details in people's faces, I just love everything about it. And honestly, the hardest part about it for me is just the fact that every 70-200 is big and bulky and gets in the way of everything. And so that's why I've created my rig, to kind of make it easier to work with. And yeah, there are times when I probably would use this lens traveling or on a hike, but I end up not doing it because I'm too nervous about how big it is and how I don't want to break it. This lens is really great when you want to bring it out to an event and get those videos where you're nice and close up to someone. You can grab the details. Actually, strangely enough, this is my macro lens. I haven't really compared it to everything, but it has a pretty great macro capability to be about 1 foot away from an object and still focus on it. And so I use this on all my close-up shots with details. So that's something I like about it, that I can also do that as well. Yeah, once again, I just love the way these two lenses look. I know that's obviously not something that really matters, but the way they just look, the blackout vibe, I'm just all for it. I appreciate that I'm excited to grab this lens and use it when the time arises. A couple other nice things about this lens. Once again, I like the OLED display. It has its limitations, it's not perfect, but I do like that it's up there and has that flexibility to display all kinds of different pieces of information. We also have 2 great lens function buttons, and I have these programmed to push autofocus and to put a tracking box on the screen, one of those green tracking boxes. And I find that I can do a couple different things, whether it's tripod mounted or handheld, with those 2 options available. Lens function button 2 has 4 instances around the barrel. So that's the one I have to the tracking box, because when you need a tracking box, you need to have it. And like I said, this lens has the ability to become a linear focused lens on the Z9 using software, and I hope that they bring that to the Z6 and Z7 cameras so that everyone can use that feature, because I think videographers really appreciate it. But this is a lens that I do at times when I'm doing close-ups actually use the lens gear for the actual focus function as it's supposed to. Also on this lens, it has a 77mm thread. I always keep this 77 to 82mm thread adapter on here because the lens hood fits right over it, and my filters are 82mm, so I just don't even notice that it's there anymore. I encourage everyone to get 82mm filters and threads and things. I think 82 is the most normal range, but this is coming from someone who doesn't have the 14 to 24 2.8, which is that 112mm filter, which for me, then I feel like just go with a matte box and get square filters, but hey, everybody's different. So that's what I prefer to use, is that 82mm, and so I use those a lot on this lens when I'm doing video production. So that is pretty much it. Those are my lenses and my entire collection. Like I said, I want to talk a little bit about how the lenses work together for me, and I use them on multicam productions. All the S lenses look really great together, and so with my 3 Nikon bodies, I can create really great shots when I use all of my lenses together, but especially on 2 camera shoots, I'm using the 24-70 and the 70-200 together. Both at 2.8, they just look really great. You can do an interview like that. But when you've got multiple people on screen, then you got to get a camera for each person and the wide, and that's where I would use 14-35 to get that super wide field of view to kind of show the space and give some context to where the interview is happening. So all of these plugged into my Z6. I usually go into an ATEM Mini Pro ISO, and then I record all the tracks separately, edit them together as separate video files. I can do a video on that if there's lots of people who are interested. But yeah, I think for multi-cams, you gotta have a lot of lenses and having great zooms that look awesome and match each other well is a great way to fill out your kit to have all the focal lengths that you need for whatever given situation. This has been Ethan with Golden Toucan. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.